My name is Deno Himonas. I'm a partner with Wilson Sonsini, and I've been a partner for all of 1 week. Yeah, no, I know. For 18 years before that, I had the privilege of serving the people of this great state as a jurist. For 11 years on the trial court bench, and for 7 on the Utah Supreme Court. And in that capacity, I had the ability to see thousands of matters involving corporate governance, securities, tax, you name it. But it was a great ride. It was a great ride. I have come out of the public service now, and I am back in the private sector, and I'm really excited. And I can't believe that I get to kick off my my private career by sharing the stage with you three. Wow, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to shut up because you don't want to hear from me. You really want to hear from the people that have done it on the ground. And that's what this portion of the program is about. Talking to people and their lived experience who have really gone through it and what they've learned through that process. Well, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. Greg, you want to start off?
You bet. I'm Greg Critchfield. I'm chairman and CEO of Sera Prognostics. My background, I've been in diagnostics for now, I count it back to the early 90s. I was with Myriad Genetics. After retiring from Myriad, I joined Sera's board. It became clear to me that there was a way to do a better job of predicting who is going to have a premature baby. You do this by actually looking at blood early in pregnancy, reading the signals that pass between the mother, the placenta, and the baby, and being able to interpret it and proactively intervene and make a difference. We've gone through several rounds of funding. We've raised over $300 million total to date. We were able to go public last year. I'll talk about that in a bit. Very excited to be here and to share experiences. I want to share personal experiences of problems that we were able to solve, because I think you'll find that to be enlightening. It certainly is generalizable to everything that you're facing.
I'm Vicki Farrar, the CEO of Lightline Medical. I started out as an attorney many, many years ago, and close to 30 years ago, I married my client in a patent infringement case in Silicon Valley. He was a serial entrepreneur that came to my firm. The firm was doing the patents for Myriad Genetics, and he had a startup with a trade secret and patent infringement problem. So I cleaned up my litigation in California, came here, worked for a couple of his companies, then started my own infection control company, Catheter Connections, that sold to Merit Medical in 2017, but it didn't sell until we had resolved and won more than a dozen patent infringements and IPRs before the patent office. And then I went to Lightline Medical, and I'm sure everybody here is afraid to go to the hospital, and you should be, and we hope to fix that. We are going to prevent catheter-associated infections by using visible light delivered via fiber optic inside a catheter that will disinfect the catheter, preventing infections, first in peritoneal dialysis, then urinary, respiratory, and vascular.
So there's always a reformed attorney on every panel.
Great. So I'm Ryan Watts. Thank you for the invitation, Kelvin, Caitlin. Powerful message from Caitlin and her family, which I was happy to read on LinkedIn maybe a week ago. Definitely unusual times all across the board, including in the public markets, including in just biotech generally. It is true that the last couple of years we've seen the power of biotech to solve problems, and I think for me, I think set out maybe a decade ago to try to solve Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, ALS. My background, I'm a neuroscientist, PhD, undergraduate at the University of Utah, fell in love with science here. In fact, I remember the first time seeing a fruit fly under a microscope. I'm probably weird from that perspective. I was blown away by the symmetry. I'm like, this is incredible. Why did I not know about science as a high school student? I've been very passionate about education from that point. Teach at the University of Utah and at Stanford a drug discovery and drug development course to really bring talent forward in the biotech field. And about 7 years ago, I was actually at JP Morgan 7 years ago, made the decision to leave Genentech after 11 years working in first cancer, then Alzheimer's, to found Denali Therapeutics. And as any founder story goes, there are a lot of origin stories. And today I just want to mention one of our key founders, Cindy Dunkle, who is here. And I encourage all of you to meet Cindy Dunkle. And I'm thinking a little bit about the power of women in biotech, but Cindy has been a partner from day one. She's our head of HR, a chief people officer, will be on a panel later this afternoon. And the reality is it is about people when you're trying to solve big problems and hiring great people. And we set out 7 years ago, have now hired about 400 employees, raised a little bit over $2 billion in capital between capital raises and deals, and have a portfolio now of 6 clinical stage assets, starting really from nothing 7 years ago. And so I think that probably the most exciting thing for me is, and I mean, there are many exciting things, but we made the decision last year to expand to Utah. We've now signed a lease and are building biotherapeutics manufacturing in the Granary District, have joined BioHive and BioUtah, and what an incredible place to be. I think this is a fantastic area to continue to grow. The Bay Area is amazing, and that's where we were founded. The battle for talent there is intense, and we think there's an incredible potential of talent here in Utah to continue our efforts, especially on the manufacturing as well as other sides, research and our G&A. But thank you for being here, and I'm happy to be on the panel and dive in.
So it's probably not lost on you that these 3 represent therapeutics, diagnostics, and devices, and bring experience to bear from each of those different disciplines. I want to ask just a series of questions to each of our panelists, and then after that, I want to save some time to make sure that you all can ask any questions that you have. And Ryan, I'm going to start with you, because you'd mentioned during your remarks that this is a particularly tough time in our markets. Our markets have been roiled by what's happened both with COVID and the war in Ukraine. And I wonder if you could just reflect, if all of you could reflect on some of the struggles that you had raising capital, and maybe share some of your stories about your individual stories about how you may have overcome some of those struggles.
Yeah, I think there are different models now in venture, and I know some of you are in venture, and there's, I think, more of a traditional model to raise capital to a certain inflection point, and once you hit that point, you raise additional capital or you have some form of exit. Denali is a little bit of a different story. Having worked at Genentech for a number of years, a couple of us, there were 3 scientific and business founders, Mark Tessier-Levine, who's currently president of Stanford University, Alex Schuth, and myself. We had thought about, founding a company in 2010, and the markets then were not great. I mean, it was sort of coming out of 2008, and it wasn't a great time to raise capital. And my biggest fear of leaving Genentech was not being able to do incredible science. I think the driving force is just to do super high quality science, and the challenge of raising a minimal amount of capital is that you often don't do the critical experiment because you fear failure. The entire company is based on a single asset, and if you do the experiment and it fails, the company is done. And so we felt like we wanted to raise significant capital to allow us to fail. We have actually killed over a dozen programs. And our first clinical stage asset, in fact, after phase 1, we stopped that program. And if we were built on that asset and as a company, we would have ceased to exist. And so the idea was to raise enough capital to basically fail and then learn from that failure, iterate, and bring the next molecule or the next project forward. It's a little bit of a different model in some ways. It required a lot of capital. We raised over $200 million in that Series A. But part of it is we had all done drug development for decades and had the experience of what success and failure looks like, right? And so, this is just one example. I know there are a lot of variations, but therapeutics, as you know, is an extraordinarily challenging area, but also very rewarding when successful. And so I was on a ski lift here in Utah with Mark Tessier-Levine in 2000. It was at the holiday break of 2014. And I said, I just don't think I can leave Genentech. I love it. 11 years, had postdocs, a lot of great science. And basically what happened is Mark said, hey, go look at this startup. It was Agios at the time, and look at this and this. And look at the science that they're doing now. Look at the capital that can be raised. I went back and then basically the next day said, all right, let's do this. And there's a longer story behind that. But the model for Denali is raise enough money to be able to fail, learn, and then ultimately succeed. Build platforms, go after genetic targets, and be okay with doing the kill experiment every time.
Is the same true in devices, Vicki?
No. And the reason I'm in medical devices and not therapeutics or biotech is because I worked for a couple of my husband's companies, and I thought that his last one, a stem cell company, it was going to take too long for my personality and my career aspirations to stay with that company, and that's why I started a medical device company. So I started Catheter Connections in 2008 because I wanted something quick to market, figure 510K, no problem, raised enough money to get that done, and then boom, as I said, over a dozen patent infringements and other suits. So it took a long time. Then the current company, I've raised nothing like what these guys have done. Our model was raise what you need when you need it. So we've raised $8.6 million to date. We expect a 510K first quarter of 2023. But we've raised no more than we thought we needed. And we decided not to go to VCs. We have 90 investors. We've gone to individuals, family offices, angel groups. And then a manufacturer, MGS Manufacturing, Mark G. Sellers started a family office. He invested in Lightline because he believed that he could help us avoid mistakes that a startup would make. So he saw that we had tremendous potential. He's not manufacturing for us, but he put in millions of dollars and said, we're going to help you not screw up. So that's my story. And I just want to say this, Lightline was started in University of Utah bench to bedside competition for a few $100s.
So we kind of have the extremes in terms of capital needs for therapeutics and devices, Greg. Where do diagnostics fit?
It depends. There are some things in diagnostics that follow are more akin to the medical device model, but there are others that are not. In our case, we had a big idea, and that was looking at the economics, looking at what we spend on prematurity in the U.S. every year, $25 billion expense. 10% of babies are born too early, and they have complications that can be lifelong. To go after that required significant capital to actually to unlock the biology and to be able to have predictions that could be the basis of therapeutics. What we had to do was run clinical trials that are akin to what you do in pharma, and to do that required a very significant amount of capital. Most diagnostic companies they actually validate that a technology can measure something, then they go to market with it and they throw it out there and see what will happen. We went all the way to actually showing what the impact is on well-being of babies and mothers, as well as the economics. And that took a tremendous amount of capital to build. Thankfully, we've done it. In the early days, I think the biggest thing we faced was skepticism. People thought that the technology we were using was not ready for prime time. It was mass spectrometry. Nobody had actually scaled it up to make it useful in an area that we have been working on. I was involved with a company out of Seattle, from a Lee Hood company, where mass spectrometry was shown to be very good at looking at protein expression differences. I knew the technology could work. It was a matter of putting the right team together and getting there. And I think one of the things Brian said is that people matter. The people are everything. The people matter in terms of the investors that you get. The people matter in terms of the employees that you have. All these things come together. You have to be looking at what are you trying to build toward, who are the people that are the best in the world to get you there, and you drive toward that success. That's the beacon that we use to be able to move forward.
So let me transition with that, because we've been talking about dollars in terms of capital, but human capital, you've all alluded to the importance of it, and I wonder if you'd just share with the audience for a minute how you go about locating the talent, pulling that talent in, and maybe bring a little local perspective. Are we in an advantage or a disadvantage position in Utah, given our educational institutions? Take it away. Greg, you start it.
I'll start, okay. Utah is an excellent place to find people with backgrounds in my case, in diagnostics. There are superb people here. If you look at my management team, a large number of them cut their teeth on other companies and have joined us from Utah. However, I think COVID's been a blessing, actually, for us. We were able to build our company virtually. We recruited nationally and internationally for the right talent, for the right job. And it really is a matter of understanding what you need and when you need it. You need to establish relationships with recruiters, with people, and you bring people in at the right time when you've got the capital, you've got the means to move forward, and you can recruit very broadly. I think we have a great pool of people here. The universities are putting out graduates that are very adept, and a lot of the people that we use in our laboratory, we bring in, we train them. They've got a great background, but they need to learn how we do it. And so we're well served by the community here as well. So I see you get it from wherever you need it.
Is the same true, Vicki, in devices and the same in therapeutics? Is this maybe a little different than we're talking about capital markets?
For medical device, I think this community is great. Virtually every employee and independent consultant, most of them are in Utah. It's our clinical advisory board and that type of thing, those types of consultants that we've gotten worldwide, not just here, but the engineers, the microbiologists, the techs, the CFO types, et cetera, have all been local, and it's all been by word of mouth. I haven't used a recruiter. I have just simply asked people who would be good. And most recently, our chief technology officer that joined us is Bob Hitchcock. He worked with me for 9 years at Catheter Connections, and he's back. So it's just a nice way to proceed.
Right.
Yeah, I guess for us, we'll see. We're going to be hiring over 50 people in the next year or so here in Utah. So I don't have enough data, but what I can say is that there isn't the same therapeutics environment here as there is in the Bay Area or in Boston. But I agree with Greg, like COVID changed everything. The ability to work hybrid or remote, to hire people anywhere across the world, the best talent we have. We just opened a site in Zurich, so we have Europe, Salt Lake City, San Francisco. But what does come to mind is Governor Cox's State of the State, where he talked about welcoming people from other states. We welcome you, just don't bring your politics, especially if you're from California. And the reason that struck me is that, of course, we're bringing some Californians. I will say I'm born and raised in Utah. I have a Utah driver's license. I've lived here for 6 years, even though we founded Denali 7 years ago. But I'm also from California, and I often joke when people criticize California. I just say, like, I hope you enjoy your iPhone and life-saving medicines. And anyway, and so I think the question is, how does talent move, and how acceptable is that, right? And I think the state, certainly the city is very welcoming. The state is welcoming. There are certain people, for example, our head of manufacturing built Genentech's last 2 plants, and then joined Denali and is building our plant, bought a home in Draper. She's relocating. She's going to be our site head. But we want to really recruit talent from Utah. And so I don't know how translatable device and diagnostics are to biotherapeutics manufacturing. There actually is not a single biotherapeutics manufacturing site in Utah. I think it's different for small molecules, but we're talking about human proteins. So ask me this question next year or the year after, and we'll see. And if you guys know great people, Cindy's sitting right over there, and you'll see her throughout the day.
Could I add one more point?
Yes, of course.
I think it's really interesting when you think about the people that you bring in. Don't forget that the investors that you choose, people who become board members, are also part of your people universe. And I can tell you one story that is very striking. We got to a point where we were trying to raise a Series D. We had some investors lined up. They promised us they were ready to fund. And at the last second, in February 19, they pulled the plug on us. We were running completely out of money. We were within weeks of closing the business. I had a very special relationship with one of our investors who lived in Europe. I called him. I told him what the problem was. He crafted us a loan that would get us through that period that actually ended up saving the company. So I think you have to be, by the way, the people that had actually pulled the plug, they did that. I believe they did that to actually get better terms, and they did ultimately invest on better terms, unfortunately, because we were in a weakened position. But we were able to get through it all, and it was because of personal relationships, working closely with people that understood the vision, that bought into it, and that supported the company in its time of great need. You run into these things that you can't predict they're going to happen, but they do happen, and you have to be ready to move.
That's a great story. I'm going to say if my gig at Wilson doesn't work out, you may see my application for the Zurich office. Yeah.
You're hired. Is that okay? I'm going to check in.
Listen,
Yeah.
Vicki, one of the things you said is, and I thought it was metaphorical at first, was that you married your client, and that's how you. And I was thinking you meant the company, right? That you're representing. And that leads to my next question: is how do you guys do it all? How do you balance? Because you really do marry the company in a very real way. How do you balance the need to raise capital, to find talent, to manage operations, to maintain personal relationships, and then, and God forbid, have a personal life at the same time, some work-life balance? Is it possible?
Well, I'll just say this, the client was not husband number one. Let's say that. But it does help to have your husband or your partner in the virtually the exact same business. So I became interested in being an entrepreneur just by watching him, okay, and going on recruiting dinners for bringing people in and understanding what he was doing and looking at his legal issues and trying to give him advice, not always taken. But having somebody that really understands every single thing you do, that is what helped. And this is my life. I mean, I am on this morning, noon, and night, and my husband understands. And I dragged him to something yesterday with me, and he's just willing to sit through these things.
Oh, is the same true? Is there a
Yeah,
work-life balance?
It's funny. I thought the same thing when Vicki mentioned that it was she had married her client. Like, I really thought it was she had married the company. What a tough question. I think you have to ask my wife to answer that question. I think the most important thing for me is, and I was thinking about this yesterday. In fact, I commented to someone at Denali. I flew in last night, so I spend most of my time in the Bay Area and some of my time here. I love my job. I mean, I absolutely love it, and I was trying to figure out why. And yesterday we have what was called Base Camp, which is all of our new employees get together, and I'm there, and Cindy's there, and Alex, really the founders of the company. And we just ask a simple question: why did you decide to come to Denali? And actually, of the 13 new employees, 12 of them had personal stories of someone that they loved that had Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or ALS. And actually, surprisingly, 4 of them had stories around ALS, which is a relatively rare disease. I just lost my mother in November to Alzheimer's disease. Actually, she started to develop dementia about a year before founding Denali. And I think when you go after something, if it's purpose-driven, then really like nothing else matters. I mean, things are frustrating. They're raising capital. I completely agree with Greg. Your investors are part of your company. They and especially during down markets, they essentially they believe in what you're doing. Of course, you believe in what you're doing, and then you have data to show that what you're doing is actually really valuable. But I think that's it. And so I agree that I wake up every day and think first, like, this is the purpose. This is essentially my calling. And I'm with all these other people who also feel like it's their calling. They're like, I just knew I had to come and work on this. Oh, forget the fact that 99.7% of what's been tried in the Alzheimer's space has failed. And we're in this giant Alzheimer's, whirlwind right now, and it's just like we still need to solve this disease, right? And maybe there's these building blocks. So for us, we go after rare diseases. We go after monogenic diseases within the broader, like, Parkinson's space. But there is this huge unmet need, and that purpose-driven allows you to just go and sort of spend 14 hours a day, maybe 6 days a week, take off a little time for church and a few other things, but yeah.
Yeah, when I was practicing back in the 90s, I used to say I loved the flexibility of the law because I could pick which 14 hours, 7 days a week I got to work. So, Greg, what's your experience?
My experience is very similar to what Ryan articulated. If you're motivated by vision, you don't want to let it fail. You want to achieve it. And I was asked by the vice chairman of Time Warner. He was actually a senior partner at Mintz Levin. He listened to a pitch that I made in the very early days looking for funding. And when we got done, he says, I know what he does, What do you do? At the time, I was executive chairman. And I said, simply put, I think my job is to make sure this doesn't fail. That's what I told him. He goes, okay, I like that. That's the way you feel about it. And I think the work-life balance is very hard. It's something that changes. The character of what you do changes as you move from early development stage into commercialization stage. The company changes, the requirements change. Right now, I'm spending a lot more time with public investors because we're now a public company, so I have to do that as part of my job. Something that I didn't do before, I have to be able to delegate to people, streamline the organization, make sure that we can continue to run. Staying close to things while you're in development stage is helpful to you as a CEO because you can actually talk to investors directly about what you're experiencing and seeing. Once you get removed a little bit from that, you have to have good channels of communication and stay on top of things as you go. I think it's hard. There's no easy answer. Everybody chooses his or her own formula. And I say that Ryan's comment, you got to ask my wife. You ask my wife, she'd tell you that I do okay at some things and I fail at others. That's what she'd say.
I wonder, I think it might be time to turn it over to the audience for a few questions right now. How much time do we have left, Kelvin? Let's see if there are any questions from our audience members. Do we have a mic that we can take around as well? All right, fire away, folks. Yes. There we go.
Can each of you share one of your most challenging experiences as a CEO and how you overcame that?
I don't want to go first. I don't want to. Yeah.
I'll go first.
All right.
Okay, so not my current company, Lightline, but Catheter Connections. We had 2 VCs from California, and we were tranche funded. And they funded us knowing that we were in litigation and that somebody had copied us and that we had patent infringements and IPRs and all kinds of litigation. And we won our first patent infringement here, got an injunction. Our competitor designed around the next day, so we didn't get a single day of exclusivity, and then I got to file suit. It takes me a while to get the product again and figure out, which patent of the 20 so are they infringing. Took time. And we had a board meeting where I brought my patent infringement counsel, the litigator, to the board meeting, and we explained why we needed to sue again. And 2 of the California VCs said, this is a litigation culture, we're done. We don't care if you go bankrupt, we don't care what happens, but we're done. We're not going to fund you anymore. That was a really big challenge. We got other funding from current investors mostly, and someone that stepped up as a lead, but that was demoralizing to the staff. Just devastating to me because we had done everything right and won all these infringements. And had we folded then, we wouldn't have been here. And we wouldn't have sold to Merit Medical, and we wouldn't have, Merit is selling that product now in over 30 countries, and Merit invested in Lightline. So it turned out, but it was just, it was horrible. And personally, I felt somewhat responsible because I, of course, was leading the charge that we don't survive unless we file suit again.
Greg?
In my current company, I look at one event that occurred in 2014. We'd gone to the Society for Reproductive Investigation to present our first data from the company on our biomarker prediction strategy. And we had, when I was traveling on a boat out to the Chateau d'If in Marseille. That's where if you're an adherent of Dumas, you understand the story. I was on the boat, and I was actually talking to a board member about the data that I'd seen that had just been presented to me that were modest. This was being able to predict who's at risk for preterm birth and who isn't. There was a signal there, but it was small. And we were tranche funded. Our requirement to get the next tranche was to have this particular study read out a positive result, and it wasn't quite there, okay? So what do you do? I remember talking to my board member and strategizing and deciding what we need to do is I need to bring in another consultant, another set of eyes to augment what we're doing. And we did. We were able to actually get through that. The company would have stopped at that point. It would not have received further funding. In the second tranche of our Series A, we would have been done. We were able to actually increase the power prediction and get the right signal and move forward. So that was a technical thing. That was a very difficult, but we had to pivot fast. We had to go back and reanalyze and redo the fundamental study that we needed in order to prove that we could predict.
Right.
I think there are really, for me, two categories of the biggest challenges. The first one I actually enjoy, although it is initially anxiety-inducing, and it's sort of it's the challenge where you have this medicine and you get this result in the clinic. And, for example, like the first small molecule we took in the clinic, which we discontinued, and I was very happy to go to the backup. But it's always, you get the data and you're disappointed. And I've really loved solving those challenges with the team. And I, like Greg, I can remember every location I've been at when I get this information. But the second challenge, which I think has been the hardest, because I think you're asking what is the hardest thing. I remember I was in the parking lot of Menchie's up in Holiday here after I'd been in the Bay Area the entire week, and my wife and I love frozen yogurt, like maybe some of you. And we were dealing with a person on our team who had a personal challenge and was really suffering. And that was one of the hardest things for me, and has been ever since. And I partner again with Cindy, but work is so important to people. And then when they suffer from personal challenges, either illness or the death of someone they love, or mental health challenges, I don't know. That has been, and I think part of it is there's a little bit of helplessness. And as someone who I really care about all the people, maybe getting back to being married to your work. I mean, I realize that people are giving 40 minimum, often 60, 70, 80 hours of their life per week, to solve these problems. And I think that I've learned over the years to be a little bit more balanced, but I just fundamentally care about those people that we've hired, and those can be very challenging.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, my name is Jayon Wang. Thanks. Well, anyway, my name is Jayon from Export Therapeutics and General Inception Venture Studio. And I was wondering, in this lean start, mostly for devices, but also diagnostics and therapeutics, in the lean startup world and also this post-Theranos environment, when your company needs a bridge round or hopefully an up round in order to hit that additional milestone to really demonstrate value to your existing investors and maybe potential investors, how do you navigate beyond being just transparent and completely honest with those investors, optimism, and also reality in order to drive like a closing pressure to get the funding that you need to reach that next point?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and answer that quickly from my standpoint. What you do, you always have to fund past the next inflection point. You know that. That's very obvious. What I do is I try to understand fundamentally what are we trying to achieve, and does the milestone that I'm driving toward make sense, and then articulate it in terms of what the value is. And you always have to speak to an investor about what the return of capital to them is going to be in the future. They don't invest just for fun. They don't invest just because they like something. They need to make a return on it. So you have to have in mind what the end game is for them to be able to realize value from it. So to me, it's really being very articulate about why it's important, understanding it, not misstating anything, being totally transparent and honest with them, but show them that there is a big story that's being supported by these data. These data are going to enable this to change the lives of mothers and babies in our case, and this is why you should invest in it. And to do that, we actually use the power of economics and economic modeling. I have a background in that was very useful at Sera to build models to show what would happen if you screen a population and you find patients who are in fact at risk that are not found traditionally. What is the economic benefit? It gives you an economic argument that you can actually play back to an investor, and you say, this is why the payers are going to like it, this is why you should like it. And what we ultimately did is we brought payers into that mix of investors, because they saw the value of it too. So I think you have to complete the story, follow the dots, and make a trail for the investor to see that there is a logical sequence here, and you're doing the right thing. This is the next fundamental step, and that their investment will be made good on. That's what you have to tell them.
Vicki, Ryan, do you want to add to that?
So I agree with absolutely every single thing that Greg said. What I did recently when we had some challenges in microbiology was be totally transparent, explain what the challenge is, but most importantly, how we were going to fix it, how we were going to methodically get rid of that challenge and keep them apprised. The other thing I did in terms of the economics was I had hired a firm, we didn't have the expertise to do this, to redo all of our economic models and show them. So this is a third party that came in and looked at 4 markets and lots and lots of Excel spreadsheets, which I don't love, so we did a narrative so that the lay audience, the lay investors could understand. And we got total support. But it was the transparency and showing that there is really, you can make a lot of money here.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it comes down to, I mean, you build your own models, right? You build venture firms and investors, you build your own models. Do you trust in the hypothesis and in the people? Yeah. That's really it. And I think one of the challenges with traditional venture, and I'm sure I'm going to make someone angry right now, so I just give that warning. The problem with traditional venture is if you're really very limitingly funding it to an inflection point, it's really hard for that management team to hire great people that think, okay, I have a job for maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And this is why I'm saying there's the other end, which is raise a lot of capital and be okay with failure and know that that failure drives new insights. The concept, the mindset is if you raise capital, people get lazy. And I'd love, if you want to hang out with me and my team for a week, you can ask us if we're lazy, in terms of how hard we work and put our time and effort. It's really, I think capital isn't related to that. It's just, do you have the ability to recruit great people? And then do you trust in the hypothesis? Because great people can have terrible hypotheses. That's possible. Also, it's biology, right? So you don't really know how it's going to play out. And so you'll build your own financial model, but do you actually think there's a high probability or a reasonable probability that the hypothesis is correct and that the team can actually show that? Because you can hire frankly, a class B or C team, even if the hypothesis is good, they're not going to do the right experiment and they're going to have limited resources. So I think that's really the dynamic I would be looking at in funding the opportunity for the next inflection.
Kelvin, do we have time for one more question?
More.
All right, yes, sir.
Hi, David Politis with Silicon Slopes. First of all, Brian, as someone whose mother passed from Alzheimer's in the last decade, you have my empathy, and I'm sure from everybody in the room. I have a question for you and for Vicki and perhaps even for Greg. Given that you have ties to Utah, but you were professionally not in Utah, what was it that led you to come back here? And what can we as a state, as individuals on the ground, politicians and the like, do to encourage more of that going forward, both from transplants and from those that are here on the ground?
Great question.
A fantastic question, I think relevant for this particular meeting. I'll give you my professional answer and then my personal answer. So professionally, we did a full evaluation of Colorado, Arizona, Oregon, Texas, and California to build our biotherapeutics plant. And we looked at all the various regions. And frankly, hands down, Utah was the most friendly. It does help that I have a home here, but we'll get to the personal reason. And even though we didn't, I think the biggest risk for us is the talent. The biggest risk is, and very specifically, biotherapeutics manufacturing, right? but we knew we could build the facility for half the price and maybe even less than what we could in California. We could work with lawmakers and cities and states to be able to get the permits, which is a big challenge in California, and much better in Utah, and even much better than Colorado. I think Arizona would have been similar in that regard. So I think the fact that we want to solve big problems in this state, we want to recruit great talent, and we want to raise up the talent here. And so I think now it's really, I want to be involved and all of us involved in educating at the University of Utah and BYU and Utah State to have talent in this particular area in therapeutics and manufacturing and diagnostics. So from a personal perspective, actually when we founded Denali, I realized I was spending half of my time on an airplane, and it was faster to get to Boston and New York from Salt Lake City than it was from San Francisco. Actually, that flight is terrible. San Francisco to Boston, if you have a headwind, it's like 8 hours. I mean, it's like going to Europe. It's terrible. And my son had just started his junior year. I'm like, you know what? Why don't you just finish in Utah? And he didn't want to leave California, but then this snow. I mean, he skied 50 times his senior year. He's a U of U student now, computer science. I was really worried he was never going to make anything of himself, but after skiing. But anyway, the point is, this is an incredible place, and it's actually really easy. I mean, it's very easy to get to any city from Salt Lake City, more so than from San Francisco. And so I realized, hey, I'll just go out of Salt Lake as opposed to San Francisco, although still spending majority of the time there. Yeah.
Vicki?
Okay, so I'm here obviously because my husband's here, but both of us decided to stay here because it is so entrepreneurial friendly. And most of the things my husband has started and what I've started, some of them have been licensed out of the university. When we've had problems and go to the university and say, well, I can't afford that sub-licensing fee, we lower. It's not like, well, what are you going to give me in exchange? I'm not going to negotiate unless I get something. It's just not like that, and I have example after example of that. I think in terms of what the state can do, at least for medical devices, I've gotten, for my last two companies, 99% of the funding outside of Utah, not in Utah. And that's really too bad. And even Sera Prognostics, you can speak to this. My husband was a founder of that company. Most of the money is outside of Utah. And it's just too bad. I like to have not just the talent here, but the investors here as well.
I think that I'm going to hit it a different way. This is a great place to work. There is a pool of people here that you can build companies with. You can build. You don't need as much capital. You can build things much more efficiently here than on either coast. Although our housing prices and things are rising very quickly here right now. But I think for me, it's really the ability to find people here. I went to the University of Utah Medical School. I have roots here. I came to Myriad in 1998. I haven't left since. Essentially, we haven't left since then. We've been here most of the time, and really, for me, Utah is a great place to find people that are entrepreneurial and want to build something. I think we, as an industry, need to do a better job of telling people who the real heroes are.
One really quick thought here. I don't think we need to justify that we're from Utah anymore. I think COVID changed everything in terms of globalization. It's fine if your investors are from, for us, it's, we're in California, and actually our investors are not really from California. They're from Singapore, Scotland, Alaska, New York. It doesn't matter. And of course we want to raise capital outside of Utah. In fact, I'm trying to think if we have a single big California investor, which you would think so. Even our venture are from Boston, and so I think we should no longer excuse ourselves, from being from Utah. This is a global world. Let's get capital wherever we can get it, and do great science. I think the biggest driving force is let's make sure that we don't have cases where we're not doing the highest quality work. And that will speak for itself. It will drive value, and the globalization will allow you to raise capital anywhere.
I love that let's do great science as the closing note, right? And I hope all of you will join me in giving our three outstanding CEOs a round of applause.